Okay, everyone knows about the Cyberpunk situation by now. All we can do at this point is wait for it all to be fixed and then wonder what the hell happened. Fortunately, Bloomberg's Jason Schreier is at it yet again and recently published a report all about Cyberpunk's disastrous rollout, in addition to a series of tweets adding a bit more detail. This piece from Schreier is a bit lighter than much of his previous work on the topic and has far fewer quotes for readers to go on, so not only is it less juicy to read through, it's also a bit less demonstrative of what really happened. It's mainly just his own words rather than loads of direct quotes from interviewees, which makes it a bit thin in my opinion. But then again, I've seen so many of these stories with all the top companies, so maybe I'm just desensitized to all of it. The thing that makes this one even more interesting though is that CD Projekt studio head and Cyberpunk game director Adam Budowski had something to add. I'm going to avoid reading out lengthy quotes since there are few from the actual devs, but I'll throw everything up on screen, and as always it's all linked in the description. First off, Schreier's report details a number of production woes that resulted in the situation the game now finds itself in. After interviewing more than 20 current and former CD Projekt employees, the environment behind the scenes sounds incredibly discordant and incohesive, which explains the abysmal launch. The interviewees described a company more focused on marketing than actual game development because they were the team that built Witcher 3. They could accomplish anything, even though Cyberpunk is much more complex. The game was announced long before the new console generation even launched, and devs knew that it wasn't going to run on old systems, but again, they managed it with The Witcher 3, so they can do it again, right? The term BioWare magic comes to mind. The idea that it will all be alright on the night if we just work hard and crunch enough. The topic of crunch around this game has been covered widely, but this report adds to that with an anecdote about 13-hour days from a former employee, who also said, "I have some friends who lost their families because of these sorts of shenanigans." Co-CEO Marcin Nowinski said that they tested thoroughly and didn't come across the issues players have been experiencing, but the developers on the other hand said that they did see these issues, they just didn't have enough time to fix them. Testing for consoles also had to be done externally due to everyone working from home during the pandemic, which revealed more bugs, but nothing could be done. Developing the game's engine simultaneously with the game itself slowed things down, and many features were cut or changed along the way, with one developer describing the situation as a train ride where the track is still being built in front of you. Apparently, up until 2016, the game was actually going to be entirely third person like the studio's past work with The Witcher. In fact, the game may have been announced in 2012, but full development didn't begin until late 2016. When gameplay was finally showed off at E3 2018, many of us were very impressed with what was to come, but as it turns out, that demo was almost entirely fake, and several gameplay features hadn't actually been built yet and never even ended up in the full release. The following year at E3 2019, the release date of April the 16th, 2020 was shared, and one developer even thought it was a joke. All of this speaks more to the idea that the priority was marketing and hyping the game up as one thing, even though the developers themselves didn't know if they could even produce it, and certainly not in such a tight time frame. CD Projekt is a Polish company, but since it is so high profile, many of their employees come from the US or Western Europe. This meant that management mandated that English had to be spoken in meetings with non-Polish speakers, but some didn't follow the rules, which resulted in a cultural barrier. Staff from other studios even said that they were shocked by CD Projekt's production style, or lack thereof, and that if someone needed a new shader or something, they'd have to build it from scratch because there was no pipeline in place to determine if someone else had already made one. The team at CD Projekt Red is significantly smaller than the ones that develop titles like GTA 5 or Red Dead Redemption 2, despite the company having the same lofty goals. Okay, that's pretty much the basic summary of the key talking points from the Bloomberg report. Studio head and Cyberpunk director Adam Budowski replied on Twitter with his own thoughts. It is worth pointing out that Schreier claims he reached out to CD Projekt for comment, but they declined. Interestingly, Budowski only picks 3 specific points to rail against, and none of it is all that convincing to me. He talks about the 2018 demo, staff knowing it wasn't ready, and Polish speakers. On the demo, he explains that game development is not a linear process, so things change along the way, hence the work in progress watermark, and missing features are just part of the creative process. Okay, I'm with you there, that's fine, and actually Schreier even acknowledges that in this tweet. But where this really falls apart for me is where he says, "Our final game looks and plays way better than the demo ever was."
Are you sure about that?
He tries to highlight that the console version is a different case and says they're proud of the game and its artistic vision before finishing with, "This all is not what I'd call disastrous." Okay, let's be fair. Some people on console are still having loads of fun with the game, and that's brilliant. I'm not going to tell them to stop having fun if they don't mind bugs, more power to them, have a great time. But be real, the game was literally delisted by Sony on PS4. That is a disaster for a game. It's unprecedented. Should it have happened to other games? Yes, absolutely, but it's still a huge problem for Cyberpunk. They had to issue widespread refunds on every platform. They've been giving out groveling apologies, even from the CEO himself, saying that's not a disaster doesn't make it so. The game does run, yes, at least on PC, but there are still many issues. While some are still enjoying it, great, more power to you, buddy. As I said, the console situation is pretty damn dire, but it's far from perfect on PC, which I think is being overlooked. It's not just the consoles where it sucks. A lot of PC players are having real problems too. Launching your game in this disgraceful state is a disaster in my book, a disaster which I'm sure will be rectified over time, but a disaster nonetheless. For his next point, he addressed claims that staff openly said it wouldn't be ready for release in 2020. Here he explains that Schreier only spoke to 20 people, some of whom were ex-employees, and only one was named. Budowski plays a bit of a semantics game here and doesn't believe that this constitutes most employees without actually engaging with the core of Schreier's point. Okay, 20 employees out of 500 may not be most, fair enough, but that doesn't change the fact that some devs knew it wouldn't be ready for 2020. He doesn't actually argue that this 20-person sample isn't representative of the problem, he just says it's not most people. Regardless of whether or not 20 people represent the whole company, Budowski doesn't talk about the fact that these people thought it wasn't ready. I'd imagine many more team members felt the same way, but obviously I can't know that for sure. Since he's in management and the relationship between management and staff appears to be very rocky, discussing such things would be very tricky, so I'm sure many more people than he was aware of felt the same. Finally, Budowski addresses Schreier's point about the language barrier. Schreier originally tweeted about that, but then deleted it and reposted something similar, claiming it was poorly worded, so this response is a little bit different now. Budowski basically explains that English is the default language for meetings, company-wide emails, and announcements. Budowski doesn't do much to counter Schreier's claims, but in this case, I'm not entirely sure that's even really necessary. Defaulting to English for a Polish company is probably a bit weird for some Polish speakers, and I have more sympathy for them than the apparently ostracized non-Polish speakers. When people speak in a foreign language around you, that can feel uncomfortable, as Schreier originally noted. He says that it led to non-Polish staff feeling like they were on the outside or like second-class citizens. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but this criticism seems like a weak complaint to me. It sounds like a problem with the non-Polish staff, not the Polish speakers. Many will want to speak in their first language or whichever feels the most comfortable to articulate their particular point, and that happens in every environment with multilingual people. That's just how it works. I imagine the reason some people will have a problem with it is because of a trust issue within the company. What is clear to me is that many people, maybe not most Budowski, but many people had big problems with management. The studio has a very high turnover of staff, which only adds to the fractured structure over there. If you're already unhappy with management and you hear or see them speaking a language you don't understand, I can easily see that being kind of uncomfortable. But that's emblematic of the wider issue, and even then it's only a hypothetical, so I don't know what I'm talking about here. I don't know what happened, but this one really doesn't hold much water with me, and Budowski's response to it is basically, yeah, so what? And I do kind of agree with him on this one. If people had issues with him, but he was constantly speaking in Polish, which you don't understand, then yeah, I could see that being a bit frustrating, but the language barrier isn't the sickness, it's a symptom. And many people just don't feel comfortable speaking in English because it's a ridiculous language full of broken rules and far too many synonyms and homonyms. Some people are uncomfortable that people aren't speaking in a language they understand, while at the same time, some other people are uncomfortable speaking in a second or third language that they're not proficient in. On the whole, Budowski's response is very weak and only addresses a handful of Schreier's talking points, and Schreier's article wasn't even that watertight to begin with. What makes things worse, as I've already said, is that apparently Schreier contacted the team, but they declined to comment, only for the studio head to personally respond to a select few grievances. Schreier's final tweet in the thread sums up things nicely. In conclusion, Cyberpunk was announced 8 years ago, but development didn't really start until 2016. In 2018, they had a little but a mostly fake demo. Most staff knew and openly said it wouldn't be ready for release in 2020, but management believed in CD Projekt magic. BioWare magic, Rockstar magic, CD Projekt magic, whatever you want to call it, it clearly doesn't work, at least not anymore. There are a lot of devs who worked their arses off on the game, and a lot of it is really incredible, but the unchecked ambition and arrogance of those at the top undermined all that hard work. Anytime I see something like this, I always see it as the fault of management and those at the top, especially shareholders and investors. Don't go giving the devs themselves a hard time about it. Eventually, the game will be better, but the last-gen console version can only go so far. I've said it pretty much every time I've talked about the game, but in a year's time, it could have pulled a No Man's Sky or a Battlefront 2 and totally deliver on what was promised. The only questions until then are, how long will that take, and when it eventually comes, will anyone even really care anymore? Anyway, that's enough of my ramblings. Can we please be done with Cyberpunk for the rest of the week? Please, I don't want to complain about it anymore. I've had enough. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and a comment to give it a boost. Hit subscribe and the bell if you want to be notified about future videos. Support the channel over at patreon.com/prettygoodgaming to help us continue this work. I've been Henry Cooper. That's all for today. Bye for now.